Inaugural episode of Everything Rugby League, the podcast. Each Monday, we'll endeavour to provide our listeners with scoreboard updates and a brief rundown of news from around the rugby league world. My co-host is Lewis, who's joining me from over in England. Lou, it's been a long time in the making, but our listeners we're finally here, I should say, for our listeners. Tell them a bit about yourself.
Yeah, we've been in the gym, haven't we? We've been preparing for this for a long time, and we're finally here. Yeah, based in the UK, due to family, but I'm obviously from Australia. Love love footy, but I'm also a bit of a Union fan too, so we'll sprinkle in a little bit of Union when possible. Unfortunately, a Raiders fan as well, so sometimes the footy is a bit harder to watch, particularly when we play on Friday night, which is what happened over the weekend, but ultimately still try and watch a few games to try and, you know, give the listeners some insight.
Raiders fan, eh? I knew you're a Raiders fan, but why are you a Raiders fan? Tell the listeners why. I don't think I've ever actually sort of delved into that.
Well, I mean, I grew up in North Sydney. I just didn't like the Bears. Like I used to go to some of the Bears games, but I guess you could call me one of those bandwagon fans from the early '90s. Like must have been 2 or 3 years old watching, Mal Meninga, Laura Daly, Ricky Stewart, Brett Mullins, Noah Andruku, Ken Nagus. Like we could be sitting there for we could dedicate a whole podcast to how good that team was, and I sort of stuck with them rather than stick with the local team. Like I went to school in there, and most of the people were from Manly, so I'm from North Sydney Bears, so they folded, and just never wanted to go for them. But now they're not so great. So maybe that's lesson learned for the young people out there going for a good team at this point in time, and then they tail off. Now you're a Warriors fan. It was I was told back in the day you were a Roosters fan, but
You make me sound like a whore, really, a whore for NRL teams. I'll tell listeners actually. It's funny that you said Brad Clyde, Ken Nagus, Brett Mullins, Laurie Daly, Ricky Stewart, all those superstars of the Green Machine. I was actually a Magpies fan back in the day when I was really young. I spent the first 10 or 11 years of my life out in the southwest of Sydney. And that was when the Magpies, before the merger with the Balmain Tigers, of course. And I've got sort of, I can recite the names, but unfortunately, they're not quite as famous as the Green Machine. The likes of Andrew Leeds, Andrew Willis, Cheriako Meshau. Who else have we got? Brett Hodson a little bit later on. Paul Langmack in the front row. So it's not quite the illustrious crew of the Green Machine though. But then when the Magpies merged with the Tigers, I wasn't prepared to follow the merged entity. So followed the Roosters for a while because my brother did, and then found my own team, and I've been a diehard Warriors fan for more than 20 years now. It's been a fucking painful existence, but it's not too bad. It's not too bad. All right, let's start with our first segment, which is scoreboard. So, Lou, take us through some of the NRL results over the weekend.
yeah, and I will attest that you are a diehard Warriors fan. Definitely, you could have easily have moved on, but you're there. But I do know you are also a Roosters season ticket holder, so whether
And that
that's
was a gift. That was a gift.
okay, okay. For the record, you're not actually a Roosters fan. We actually both hate. So over the weekend, firstly was the Cowboys absolutely smashed the Raiders, 34-16. Was not as close as that scoreline indicates. The Dolphins, 30, Sharks 28, probably game of the round, I'd say. Hammer scoring one of the best tries you'll ever see. Tigers getting up over the Titans, 18-10. Rabbits, with Latrell Mitchell having his statement game of sorts, 22-12 over the Broncos. The Storm over the Warriors, we both watched that. That was actually a really good game of footy, 38-24. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit. The Roosters, 28, Eels, 18. Seagulls 30, Dragons 14. So yeah, Manly over the Dragons, and actually the Panthers they 26-18 over the Knights. But I will say the Knights played some really entertaining footy. Bradman Best was in everything, and potentially, yeah, they chanced their arm. I didn't mind the Knights, even though on paper they probably weren't as strong as the Panthers. But yeah, not a really good round of footy. Keith, what did you think? And let me go over the top eight before we get moving on. So the Storm are officially your top of the table. Panthers 2, Sharks 3, Dolphins unbelievably 4, the Roosters in 5th, Bulldogs 6th, Raiders in 7th, and Seagulls round at the top 8.
Jeez, it's painful hearing that the Warriors aren't in there. Hey, I still expect big things this year. But anyway, I agree that that Dolphins game was actually one that I wasn't expecting to be as good as what it was. And on the Panthers Newcastle game, congratulations to anyone in Newcastle that turned out for that game. They had just shy of 30,000 people there, which is a pretty shitty weekend in terms of weather here in Sydney. I'm sure it's quite similar in Newcastle. So they just keep turning up, those Novocastrians. But I don't know, as a Warriors fan, that was I thought we were a real shot, particularly early in that second half, and then we just fell apart. Unfortunately, we just lost our composure, but hopefully we learn from it. But Dolphins continue to defy my expectations completely. I expected them to drop away just like they did around this time last year, but another cracking round of NRL. Hopefully, in the next few weeks, when you read out the top 8, some other teams will be in there, because I think a couple of those teams will drop out by the end of the year, but I'm sure we'll discuss that later. Just to go on the Super League results from the weekend, the English or European Super League results. We had Castleford Tigers going down to Wigan Warriors 10-8. We had another away win with the Leeds Leopards travelling to Perpignan in France and beating Catalan Dragons 10-2. We had Hull FC, and this one was a big upset for me. Hull FC 18, Leeds Rhinos 10. So Hull FC were battling with London as just the most terrible team this year. So they got a win against Leeds of all teams as well. Hull KR continue to be strong, 32-6 over Huddersfield Giants. London Broncos, don't get me started on London Broncos on-field performance, that is. Scoring only 6 points to St Helens, 52 points at home. Now, I guess it's a fun fact, for lack of better terminology. The London Broncos are actually on track to score the lowest amount of points in Super League history. So they're averaging only 10 points per game at the moment. And they would have to go back to, I believe, 1997, when Huddersfield Giants averaged only about, I think, 13 points per game. So London really struggling to compete in Super League. In the last game of the round, we've got Warrington 14, beaten by Salford Red Devils 25. So the top 6 of the Super League table, St Helens and Wigan out in front on 22 points each. Hull KR on 20 in third. Warrington Wolves and Salford Red Devils both on 18 points. And lastly, Catalan Dragons on 16 points. So any sort of surprises for you in the Super League ladder there? It's the same old names.
Yeah, I mean the Dragons have sort of fallen off, haven't they? And it's really disappointing to see, actually. Yeah, it's the same old, isn't it? There's not really something really to say about Super League. I think the disparity between top and bottom is quite evident. I mean, Hull have just been abysmal this particular season. Hull FC, that is, but London Broncos as well. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, and the way that sort of the Dragons have fallen off. But that's probably my biggest takeaway, considering last year and the year before well, I guess the last 5 years have been very strong, and they sort of haven't really been able to maintain that. I guess losing, people like Mitch Pearce probably hasn't helped.
Yeah, they're really struggling with injuries, and they've been sort of developing young French players, genuinely developing them. And that's been the limelight coming out of that club, which is fantastic to see news reported around that. But I think, they had James Maloney for a while there, and when he left, they had Mitchell Pearce. So they had two NRL quality halves, and now unfortunately they don't have that. There's rumours in Australia that they're looking to sign Luke Keary, who I know has announced his retirement from the NRL, but they're hoping to tempt him to backflip on that. It'd be a great signing, in my opinion, as long as it doesn't get in the way of developing young French halves.
He'd be huge. Theo Fags is in there. And to be fair, I mean, I've watched a couple of Dragons games this season, and they have had some pretty good results with a French spine, which is unreal if you really think about it. Artur Morg, and they've got a really good name escapes me. He's a center, but he's an absolute machine. They actually have some fantastic French talent, but whether that, like with any sort of competition, the depth, you lose, one of those guys falls off in form or injury. You don't have a next man up in the French ranks. So yeah, and Luke Keary, I mean, he'd be an absolute machine in Super League. I think he's always been an underrated player. It's so fast, but he's always had a good team around him. So whether he's going to be able to, maintain that sort of level with the Catalans, I'm not sure. But where did you read that from? Was that from the Mole site?
No, that's actually from News Limited, which is a perfect segue to something I wanted to get your thoughts on, actually. So yesterday, News Limited, David Riccio in particular, published some comments that Ivan Cleary, obviously Penrith Panthers premiership winning coach, made. And the title of the article is Penrith coach Ivan Cleary calls for shorter NRL season. Now, I won't read the whole article, of course. I'll just stick to Ivan's comments themselves, and then this is something that I've been pondering for a while now, but I want to hear your thoughts first. So Ivan says there's been a lot of chat around the amount of injuries, probably due to a high amount of high-end players that have gone down, which has probably exacerbated that conversation. We're looking into our own research at the moment. We've actually been not too bad, but I don't really have any of the answers as of yet. The game is probably faster and there'll be more ball in play than ever. So I guess that has a bit to do with it. At some point, we're going to have to look at the length of the season and how much these guys are playing. We definitely need to look into it, which I believe the NRL are open to. Now, he goes on to cite the women's competition providing an opportunity to take some of the heavy lifting off the men's side of the NRL to potentially decrease the amount of games played by the men. What are your thoughts on this one? Because it's been something I've been pondering for years now, but what do you reckon?
Is this season too long? To me, when you compare it to other competitions as physical, like the NFL, for example, the NFL only play 17 games, and then so if your team makes the playoffs, you play another 2 or 3, 4, I think, to make the Super Bowl. So yeah, he's got a point with all the injuries, but in saying that, with the new team, and you alerted me to this actually, the new teams coming in, I think no changes required. I just don't know if, caught me off guard in terms of, does the injuries correlate to, is it all soft tissue? Is that what he's trying to say? That because of soft tissue, the game's gone too fast, injuries are occurring?
Well, it's kind of saying that there's a myriad of potential reasons for it, and it's nothing new. However, the injuries to the higher profile players en masse has caused this to all of a sudden be in the limelight more so than what it was. But 27 rounds, that's a long, long season. What would be the optimal amount of rounds if you were sort of chair of the ARLC and about to negotiate a new TV contract and not have clubs lobbying for more and more money like they usually do? If you had your way in a dream world, how many rounds would you have?
Well, the thing is because there's potentially going to be 20 teams in the next few years. So you could just have, every team plays each other once, alternate the home and away, year on year. And then, the final series adds one extra 4 games to it. So potentially you could run it like that. I don't know about, obviously, adding games is never that going to help with injuries because, these guys start preseason, November, especially the teams that are struggling. So they start November. Then they pretty much don't have a break, really, for me, honest. So, yeah, maybe optimally everyone plays each other once. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's ever going to be true parity. And I guess to provide context, I mean, we need to take into account the fact that there's 3 buys in those 27 rounds. There's 24 games in reality, which if there was no buys and there was only 24 rounds, that's about only 2 rounds more than what I would say is the perfect amount. Now, I think one of the important things is that the NRL has market saturation, eyeballs on screens and at the stadiums for as long as they possibly can. So it's not just the amount of games played, it's the amount of weeks in the year where rugby league is televised. So if we're going to sort of get rid of the buys and have a perfect 20-team competition, I think you potentially need to prioritize the derbies. The Penrith versus Parramatta, Roosters versus South, always have 2 of those. But then what happens when in those years where, obviously Parramatta need to play Penrith twice and other teams that aren't part of any Sydney derby or whatever only have to play them once. So you're never going to get that perfect synergy in terms of fairness, in my opinion. But if you were to still try and keep the competition going for as many weeks of the year as possible, you could probably, I mean, and this is to Pandora's box to talk about moving Origin, but you could probably have standalone Origin weekends where you've still got big games of the women's Origin, which is rating over 1 million people on average watching on Channel 9 now, and obviously the men's Origin as well. So you're still going to have rugby league as the forefront of, the news feed in terms of at least the eastern states. And then obviously, me, I'm a massive international league fan. So I'm going to say, introduce even more international rugby league at the back end. So there's options here. Ivan Cleary is right. 27 rounds, I must say, many, probably at least 5 rounds too many for me. Anything else to add on this subject, though? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I remember a few years ago they had Samoa Tonga would play in the same week as Origin. Not sure why that's not carried on, but I totally agree that it is a showcase event, the Origin. So you could have that game, the women's game, the couple internationals, whether that probably would draw just as big of attendance as some of these games, especially when I saw some of the numbers over the weekend. But I think one of the biggest problems is, and I think you alluded to it, is that the NRL need to fill the time slots. Is that right? So they need 3 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday, 2 games on Friday, 1 on Thursday, right? So if you drop those, what are they going to fill them up with? Is that the underlying issue?
Yeah, well, I mean, you'd need to renegotiate or once the TV deal expires at the end of 2026, a new TV deal comes from 2027 onwards. So these decisions need to be made years out, which is why I think the NRL is set to consolidate their sort of future expansion blueprint next Wednesday, which is the same day as Origin 2. And everyone sort of reporting that they're due to outline a 20-team competition by the time the Brisbane Olympics happens in 2032, but teams in Perth, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. But what that also does is enable them to commit to how many teams are going to be in the competition and in what year. And then they sort of reverse engineer from then with how many games per round or per year they promise the broadcasters. So you can't promise a certain amount of games if you don't know how many teams that you're going to have in the competition, how many games per round you're going to have. So all this needs to be done years out. But to cut the story short, my opinion is a 22-round competition would be absolutely perfect. Still room for a couple of derbies in there if everyone played each other once or twice, or a few derbies, I should say. But yeah, said anything further to this one? Want to move on to something that you added to the run sheet?
Let's crack on. Let's get onto this bullshit with the referees at the moment.
Yeah, I'm keen to hear this because for anyone listening there, Lou added this to the run sheet. It's the topic of inconsistent refereeing, which I know we've been speaking about since 1908. But specifically, you have an issue with the application of the sin bin, Lou.
Yeah, so I mean, we were commenting throughout the Storm Warriors game, and I've got a few. I've cherry picked a few sin bins, and comparatively to basically Suoli's send off was obviously in Origin as well, so that heightened the threshold of a send off in my opinion. But it was still a send off. Now, did you see the Kurt Mann crusher last week? He
Yeah.
absolutely had the worst crusher I've seen in a long, probably the worst crusher I've ever seen on Penasini. The refs missed it initially because they sort of just, and then it went to the bunker, I think. Anyways, long story short, he actually got sin bin for it. Now, I think that partly because Penasini didn't, he grabbed his neck and sort of, he just played on. Therefore, the refs didn't treat it with any sort of seriousness, right? Now, that's one case study. Then we watched the Warriors Storm game the other night, and you look at, okay, what was your take on Chanel's? They went back 2 plays, gave a penalty for something that happened 2 plays ago. Like I've never seen that before. Which okay, so you got that one, and that was a huge head high. It was like it was pretty brutal,
Bade.
and that it was a big one. And then there was what was it? Who's the one who took out the lead runner of that footy and got, was it DWZ?
Oh, he got sin binned.
Yes, he got sin
Yeah.
bin, and then there was another sin bin. I know I don't want to bring up old wounds, but there was another sin bin for the Warriors.
None of them should have been sin bin. Fair play. It's the Warriors.
I think that's the thing. It was almost like, why is the Kurt Mann crusher a sin bin when that maybe should have been a send off because of just how serious it was? Then you've got Suoli getting sent off for a brutal shot on Walsh. You've got Tamari Martin getting just a penalty for something they deemed serious enough to rewind the game. It was all over. It's all over the place. And let me just look up, what was that other yellow? Was it foul play or was it just? Oh no, it was Montoya. He didn't track back 10. So there's to be honest, tracking back 10, professional foul, that gets the same amount as a crusher, for example. Like the game is just not obviously the same penalties apply to the 10 minutes in the bin. They actually have to sit down and look at this because foul play and professional fouls, they're not the same. The implications to the player safety is not the same. There's a lot that just pissing me off about it because you could be right now. You guys are on the wrong end of that, Warriors, especially with the way the game just completely changed when you had 11 men on the field. But they weren't necessarily like, especially the professional foul. That was just stupid play, right? But that has the same consequences as taking someone's head off at the moment.
Yeah. No, when you put it like that, that's a fair call. Like, yeah, some of them are threatening the livelihoods of other players. If it's something really, really reckless, like that crusher tackle that you alluded to, and that's given the same weight as Montoya just being stupid and not getting back on side
Exactly.
after a tap penalty. It's a good point when you put it like that. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, I think Rugby Union now has some kind of 20-minute sin bin, I heard. And then they're floating with the idea of having a 20-minute sin bin. And then at the end of the 20 minutes, the team that had the sin bin can put another player on. instead. So the guy that was sin bin, it's almost halfway between a sin bin and a send off. Difference being a send off in rugby league is off for the rest of the game. But what Union's talking about is a 20-minute sin bin where he can't come back and play that game, but another player can replace him. So you still have 15 on the field after 20 minutes of that guy being in the sin bin. Do you think something like that would work?
I mean, we could try it. Why not? And obviously, rugby league's the king of changing the rules mid-season. We could try them all in like all one round. I was just thinking, like, as dumb as it sounds, like Montoya, he was offside. You can that professional foul. You could just say, okay, for this set, you need to sit down. So the Warriors lose a player for one set or maybe two sets. You know what I mean? Just it didn't deem. It wasn't worthy of losing a player for what's the maths on 10 out of 80. More than 10% of the game. Because in that particular moment as well, the Storm weren't going to score a try. They just ran into Montoya. He just there was plenty of players around him. It was never going to be like a penalty try. So I just think there has to be a grander scale of penalizing a player for doing something stupid, like, not tracking back 10 versus, okay, I'm going to try and take this guy's head off. And that guy might, because the other thing as well is, because Farlongo, and Block, it was a blocker, whoever was commentating was talking about it. It was these guys, potentially, you might take Farlongo off, right? Because of the HIA, but because Tamari Martin didn't get bin, they would have just lost a player, as opposed to in other situations where, Suoli is a great example. They pretty much have to play one man unless the tie away. So, yeah, I'm a bit fired up about it because I feel like we saw it already a few weeks ago. It can ruin a game. There has to be a better way to manage this. It can't just be, well, let's just send him off and, debate about it for weeks on end. Let's try and come up with a scale of, okay, professional fouls, they're not as dangerous, or they're not dangerous at all. But then you've got the guys who actually go out there to, injure people. Not great.
Yeah, well put.
And he only got 2 weeks. He only got 2 weeks, Kurt Mann, which I found like they kind of go through that phase in the NRL of let's stamp out the chicken wing, and they give him huge amounts of weeks. And then as time goes on, they sort of just go, it's not that important anymore. So they go, I one time saw, I don't want to name the player, but he got a bit too fired up and put a chicken wing on, and I don't think he even got anything for it. Rant over.
No, good rant too, and I agree with everything you just said. So watch the sin bin. Sorry to stick on the Warriors here, but the Chanel Harris Tavita and the Cowboys Chad Townsend sin binning last week was the most pathetic sin binning I've ever seen in my life. So let's just end it there. We've only got a few minutes left before we're keeping these episodes short and sharp, 30 minutes, so you can digest on a Monday night or early sort of Tuesday morning, depending on where you're at. Since it starts episode 1 of the Everything Rugby League podcast, so I'll get your thoughts on who has been the surprise packet for you this year so far, and who's disappointed you the most?
Well, questions. And it took me a while. Such a surprise. I didn't realize the Dolphins were doing fourth, so they have to be. But shout out to the Dogs. They've actually rejuvenated their season. Disappointments, obviously the Rabbits, the Broncos, but probably the Rabbits. They've sacked their coach. You saw that coming so early on. Yeah. How about yourself?
Yeah, it just highlights that Wayne Bennett is undisputably the GOAT. Indisputably. Yeah. I always thought Wayne Bennett was the GOAT anyway. But this sort of talk, I understand Craig Bellamy's been, at it for 20, 22, 23 years, however long it is, and he never misses the finals. But Wayne Bennett's done this at multiple clubs, and that Dolphins roster is not the Melbourne roster, that's for sure. So the fact that the Dolphins are still in the top 4, and what is it, round 16 coming up, I think? That's incredible. And they're $26 to win the premiership. I had them falling away big time by now. So, yeah, I agree with the Dolphins. And, same with I also agree with the shout out to the Bulldogs. They're playing with all heart. So well done to Cameron Giraldo and the Bulldogs. I still skeptically have them missing the 8, but only time will tell. So sorry, any Doggies fans out there. I think that
They're playing good footy, man.
I think the Broncos have got to come into the 8. They are playing good footy. I just think that they're absolutely redlining and they're at their ceiling, whereas there's some teams slightly outside of the 8 that are nowhere near their ceiling and will come in. But what do I know? I mean, I'm sure every Doggies fans out there is going to tell me where to go, basically. But coming on to the disappointments of the season, just to wrap things up, who have you got?
The Rabbits, they have, unbelievably poor considering their roster. They're
going on a run.
But I mean, they should never be going on a run to begin with. They should just be realistically up there every week. They've got rep players everywhere, and if you really look at their majority of their players have played rep footy, so I'd have to go with them.
I'm going to go for the purpose of providing a different answer to you, because obviously the Rabbitohs have definitely been disappointing. I don't know where this run's going to stop with the Rabbitohs. Just as a side note, could they scrape in the 8? But I don't know. What's that space? Latrell is in fine form, but he's going to be missing due to Origin now. Gold Coast Titans. Now, this is going to make me sound like an absolute idiot now in hindsight, but I actually had the Titans making the 8 at the start of the year. The reason being is Desi doesn't really miss the 8. Very, very rarely does Desi miss the 8. And I thought they had a good foundation of talent there, of experience. Tino Fasasumala Awe, David Fifita, Kieran Foran, Pops, and then some good young players like Jaden Campbell, obviously starting to really establish themselves as regular first graders. But Titans have been a huge disappointment to me. The fact that they're only on 10 points and lost to the Tigers last week, I don't know. I expected them to be basically around about what the Dragons are doing. But instead it's the Dragons, who I actually had in my bottom 4. So I'm really making myself look like a fool right now by admitting all my mistakes. So episode 1, get them all out of the way. All right. That seems like a good place to end things on. What do you think of our first episode, Lou?
We are shaking a bit of ring rust off. Just to FYI, we've got about at least 50 episodes somewhere in the vault in terms of getting ready for this, and then we had a bit of a hiatus. But now we're back, and we're gonna bring you some fresh content that one way or another will either piss you off or get you listening next week. I will say this: shout out to the Titans for being able to convince David Fifita to stay, and also signing Carter Gordon, who didn't have a great World Cup in rugby union, but the fact, when we were growing up, there's no way anyone could have convinced a Wallabies fly half to join the rugby league. So that just shows you how strong things are at the moment.
Yeah, isn't that weird? A bit of a damning testimony to rugby union that the last place team in the NRL convinced their current fly half of the Wallabies to sign with them. Now, context, obviously the Melbourne Rebels folded, but still doesn't look good for rugby union, unfortunately. All right, well, that's been episode 1 of Everything Rugby League. We will see everyone next Monday.
Thanks for listening to Everything Rugby League. If you like this episode, give the show a follow and leave a review. For more news and insights, follow us on Facebook or head to everythingrugbyleague.com.